The air was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel like a burden. Emily Parker stood just outside the towering black gates of the Harris estate, her boots coated in dust, her heart a storm barely held together. Inside, the funeral was already underway. Men in tailored suits, women in black veils, all grieving more for their image than for the man now lying cold in a golden coffin. Her eyes burned, not from tears, but from holding them back for too long. She had loved him. Not as the world saw him, a powerful, flawed patriarch, but as the broken man behind closed doors who, in the end, had finally whispered the truth. A truth that had shaken her to her core. A truth she could no longer keep buried. Today wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about reclaiming a voice that had been silenced. About forcing a room full of liars to look her in the eye and face what they'd done. Her fingers brushed the envelope tucked inside her coat, his letter, the one that changed everything. She stepped forward, each step steady, deliberate. She wasn't here as the caregiver anymore. She was here as his daughter. The wind was sharp that morning, cold enough to sting her cheeks, but not enough to dull the fire in her chest. Emily stood at the edge of the estate's long gravel driveway, her fingers clenched tightly around the strap of the worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Beyond the wrought iron gates, the mansion loomed with intimidating silence, its tall windows veiled in shadow, its black-draped entrance filled with people who barely noticed her existence. Cars lined the driveway, sleek, black, polished, just like the hearts of those who had come not to mourn, but to maintain appearances. Emily's breath caught as she watched them, each step she took forward stirring out more than dust. Memories. Rage. Grief. She had once moved quietly through these halls, seen but not truly seen, a nurse, a servant, a ghost in white shoes. But Mr. Harris had seen her. In his final days, when his voice trembled and the family turned their backs, he had reached for her hand, whispered truths that now echoed in her soul like a promise: they can't bury everything. Now, as she approached the gate, she was no longer a silent observer. She wasn't here to cry. She wasn't here to blend in. She was here to speak. To drag secrets from the velvet shadows and lay them bare, even if it meant tearing apart every carefully curated lie behind those towering doors. Her heart thudded with dread, but not fear. She had nothing left to lose. And everything to set right. The air inside the grand hall was thick with the scent of lilies, almost too sweet, overwhelming, cloying. Emily could taste the sharpness of it as it filled her lungs. She stepped inside, her boots clicking softly against the cold marble floor, the sound resonating louder than it should in the oppressive silence. The hall stretched out before her, gleaming chandeliers casting fragile light across the mourners, their faces hidden behind veils of sorrow, but their eyes, sharp and inquisitive, darting in her direction. Everyone in black. Everyone but her. She was the only one in gray, a subtle rebellion against the unspoken rules of grief. The gray dress was muted, understated, but the decision to wear it felt like a quiet declaration, one she knew would make her stand out, and she didn't care. Her father had been a man of defiance, and she would honor that now, even if it meant drawing the eyes of those who would rather pretend she wasn't there. As she moved deeper into the room, she caught the unmistakable flicker of recognition. A murmur passed through the crowd like the ripple of a wave breaking on a distant shore. She couldn't help but notice Margaret Harris, the widow, standing near the center, a portrait of grace despite the tragedy. Margaret's presence was overwhelming, even in mourning, the widow's black dress elegant, but the way her fingers clutched the champagne glass, delicate yet tense, betrayed something far darker beneath the surface. Their gazes met, and time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Margaret's face shifted ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing, lips pressed together as if she had tasted something bitter. It was the kind of expression you wore when you realized that something, or someone, was a threat to everything you'd built. "Emily," Margaret said, her voice sharp, each syllable carefully measured, like a blade kept just out of reach. "I didn't expect to see you here." Emily's response was quiet, controlled, but there was a coldness in her tone, like ice seeping through the cracks of a once strong facade. "I'm sure you didn't. But I have every right." The tension in the room thickened immediately, palpable. The whispers quieted as if everyone in the hall had simultaneously realized that the delicate web of secrets they'd carefully spun over the years was beginning to unravel. Emily felt their eyes like 1,000 hot needles against her skin, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Without taking her eyes off Margaret, she reached into the pocket of her coat, pulling out the small, folded envelope. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but clear, the ink slightly smudged as though his hand had trembled with each word. She held it up between them, the paper rustling softly in the tense silence. "I have something to share," Emily said, her voice low but steady, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid truths. "Something my father wanted all of you to hear." For a moment, no one moved. The stillness hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as though the room collectively held its breath, waiting for what came next. The hum of conversation died, leaving only the soft click of the piano keys being struck by the absent-minded pianist, who had forgotten his place in the midst of the unfolding drama. And then, Emily did what no one had expected. She raised her voice, breaking through the silence that had settled like a heavy shroud over the room. "Everything you thought you knew about my father, it's a lie," she said, her eyes now sweeping across the crowd. Every face in the room froze, but she didn't flinch. He wasn't just a victim of his past. He was murdered, by all of you. The words hung in the air like the spark of a fire, igniting the room with a quiet fury. Gasps rippled through the crowd, faces turning pale, murmurs building into a tide of whispers. Margaret's face twisted, her lips parting as though she might speak, but nothing came out. Emily could feel the eyes on her, feel the shifting of the ground beneath her feet. She wasn't the daughter who had been hidden away for too long. She wasn't the quiet observer of their lives anymore. Now, she was the storm. The room was unnervingly still, as if the world had paused to witness the storm that was about to break. The shadows from the flickering candles danced across the walls, their warm glow adding an eerie contrast to the icy tension that hung in the air. Emily's hand trembled as she held her father's letter, a letter that had haunted her for years. The paper was creased from years of storage, yet its weight felt as fresh as the first day she had read it in secret. She knew, deep in her heart, that tonight would be the night when everything changed, whether she was ready or not. The letter had waited, a silent accusation, a reminder of her father's final words. But now, as she stood in front of a room full of people who had always surrounded her with whispers and half-truths, she had no choice but to reveal it. She had no choice but to reveal her truth. The eyes of the room were on her, but Emily could barely feel the weight of their stares. Her attention was consumed by Margaret, her stepmother, who stood across the room, face pale but otherwise unreadable. Margaret had always held a place of power in this house, her authority cloaked in an air of grace that Emily had once admired. But now, as the letter slipped from Emily's fingers and she began to read it aloud, all that admiration seemed like a distant memory. Margaret's gaze never wavered, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she could prevent the truth from escaping by sheer force of will. But Emily saw it, the flicker of something darker in Margaret's eyes, something that couldn't be hidden. Emily's pulse quickened as she held the paper closer to her chest, summoning the courage she had gathered over countless sleepless nights. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. With each word she read aloud, Emily felt the heavy burden of her father's past settle over her like a cloak. Her voice faltered for a moment as she reached the opening lines of the letter. The words were both foreign and intimate, as if the past had suddenly surged to life, demanding attention. My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. There are things I have kept hidden from you, truths I never wanted to burden you with. But now that I am gone, you must know the truth. Margaret Harris is not the woman you believe her to be. She is responsible for the death of your mother and the ruin of our family. It was her hand that set the wheels of our downfall in motion, and it is she who continues to lie to everyone, including you. The words felt like a physical strike, each syllable a punch to the gut. Emily's throat tightened as she read the final lines, the words searing into her mind as if her father's spirit was still here, urging her to act. Her breath hitched, but she refused to stop. She couldn't back down now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth, not when her father's dying wish hung in the balance. As she read the final confession, her voice grew steadier. It was no longer just a letter, it was her father's legacy, his last plea for justice. Margaret's face was ashen, but Emily could see the tightness in her jaw, the flicker of rage in her eyes. It was a terrifying moment. Margaret had always been careful, calculated, a woman who never allowed herself to be exposed. But now, her facade was crumbling, and Emily was there to witness it. Do not let her win, Emily. Expose her for the monster she is. You are stronger than I ever was, and I know you can do this. You owe it to yourself and to your mother. The last line of the letter fell into the room like a thunderclap, the silence afterward thick with the weight of the revelation. Emily's hands shook violently as she folded the paper, almost as if she couldn't bear to hold the truth any longer. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the room was waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. Margaret's gaze shifted then, her lips parting, but no words came out. The woman had always been a master of manipulation, of keeping secrets buried beneath her polished exterior. But the cracks were now too wide to ignore. Emily could see it, the guilt, the regret, the fear that flashed momentarily across Margaret's face. But there was no mercy in Emily's heart now. She had suffered too long under the weight of this lie. Margaret, Emily said, her voice trembling but fierce, a quiet strength rising within her. You've spent years playing this game, hiding behind your lies. You've manipulated everyone in this room, made us all believe that we were wrong, that we didn't know the truth. But the truth is finally here. And it's not just my truth, it's my father's truth. You are the one who destroyed our family, who destroyed everything. The room held its collective breath. The guests, who had once looked to Margaret for guidance, were now watching her with uncertainty, their loyalty beginning to waver. Emily could feel the eyes of the room on her, could feel their shift in perception, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid anymore. This was her moment. The moment when she took back everything she had lost. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, her eyes frantic as if she were searching for some way to regain control, but the power had shifted. Emily could feel it in her chest, this newfound strength, this clarity that came with the truth. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't the naive daughter who had let the lies persist for far too long. You've had your chance, Margaret, Emily said, her voice soft yet unyielding. But I won't let you continue this deception. You've hurt enough people. I won't let you hurt anyone else. As the words hung in the air, Margaret's face turned a deep shade of crimson. The weight of Emily's accusation pressed down on her, and she took a hesitant step back. The room had shifted completely. Emily had spoken the words that no one else had been brave enough to say, and now, there was no going back. The air in the room had shifted, thickening with the weight of Emily's revelation. A hush fell over the gathering, and what was once a lively atmosphere became suffocating, like the silence before a storm. The clinking of glass and soft murmurs faded into nothing, replaced by the echoing sound of Emily's voice, which had cut through the room like a sharp blade. She had done it, she had exposed the truth. But with the truth came the inevitable fallout, and she was about to feel the full force of Margaret's wrath. Margaret stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Her usual calm, calculated demeanor had been shattered, replaced by a look of pure panic. She knew the gravity of what Emily had just done. The letter was more than just a piece of paper, it was a ticking time bomb, a confession that would unravel years of carefully laid plans. Her heart pounded in her chest as her mind raced for an escape, any way to regain control of the situation, but the walls were closing in around her. There was no way out now. Emily, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of clarity wash over her. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, the burden of secrets she had carried for years suddenly gone. But the feeling was bittersweet. The truth, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. There was no turning back now. The years of deception, the lies Margaret had woven into the fabric of their lives, were finally exposed for all to see. And Emily was the one who had ripped the veil away. Her heart was racing, but not from fear. It was a different kind of urgency, one that came with the realization that this moment would define everything. She was no longer a victim of Margaret's manipulation, she was the one in control. "You don't know what you're saying, Emily." Margaret finally broke the silence, her voice shaking, but she quickly tried to recover, her tone hardening. "This is all just a misunderstanding. Your father was angry, sick, he didn't know what he was writing. He was confused, he didn't mean it." But Emily could see through the layers of manipulation in Margaret's voice. She wasn't buying it. The years of doubt, the years of questioning whether her father's accusations were true, were finally answered in this moment. The letter, the words he had written with his own hand, were undeniable. Margaret's attempts to deflect and deceive only made her guilt more evident. Emily's eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a small, bitter smile. Margaret's gain was over. "No, Margaret," Emily replied, her voice steady and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of her father's truth. "I don't believe you anymore. You can't just twist things to suit your narrative. My father wasn't sick. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he wrote that letter because he knew who you truly are. I've known it all along, even when I didn't want to admit it." The truth was burning in her chest now, and it was impossible to ignore. Emily had spent years hiding from it, from the reality of what Margaret had done to her family. But now, the veil had been lifted, and Emily stood taller, stronger than she had ever felt before. She wasn't afraid anymore. In this moment, she felt a power she hadn't known existed within her. Her father's voice was there with her, guiding her through the storm. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, but the anger was tinged with fear. Fear that Emily would expose everything. For a brief moment, her composed exterior cracked, and her true nature, greedy, manipulative, and ruthless, emerged. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Margaret hissed, her tone low and threatening. "You think reading a letter changes anything? You think this will be the end of it? You're just a child, Emily. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to build the life we have." The words stung, but Emily was no longer swayed by them. Margaret's attempt to control the narrative, to make herself the martyr in this twisted story, fell on deaf ears. Emily had spent far too long listening to the lies, to the manipulation. She could no longer play the role of the dutiful daughter, the one who overlooked the truth because it was easier to live in denial. "No, Margaret," Emily said again, her voice colder now, sharper. She stepped forward, her heart beating with a fierce determination. I'm not a child anymore. I'm not the same person you manipulated all these years. And I'm not going to let you control this story anymore. I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are. The truth will come out, whether you like it or not." For a moment, there was silence. Margaret's face contorted with rage and disbelief. She took a step forward, her eyes flashing with venom. "You think you can destroy me? You think you can ruin everything I've worked for? You're nothing but a naive girl, Emily. I built this life. I made sure you had everything you could ever want. And this is how you repay me? By trying to tear it all down?" Emily's fists clenched at her sides, but she didn't flinch. This was no longer about her. It was about the years of lies, about her father's legacy, about the family Margaret had so ruthlessly destroyed. "I'm not here to destroy you," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with an unwavering certainty. "I'm here to expose the truth. And the truth will destroy you. Not me. Not anyone else. Just you. You can't run from it anymore." Margaret's face twisted in frustration as she took a step back, as though trying to retreat into her carefully constructed world. But it was too late. The door had already been opened, and there was no shutting it now. The truth was out, and Emily was the one who held the key. Turning on her heel, Emily walked toward the door. Her heart was pounding, but this time, it wasn't from fear, it was from the overwhelming sense that she had taken control of her own destiny. She wasn't running away. She was walking toward the future where she could finally face her father's memory with peace, knowing that she had done everything in her power to make things right. Behind her, Margaret's voice was nothing but a distant echo, a futile attempt to hold on to the power she had lost. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret this more than anything." But Emily didn't look back. She knew there was nothing left to regret. The door slammed shut with a resounding thud, the sound of it reverberating in Emily's chest like the final punctuation to a long, painful sentence. She stood in the middle of the hallway, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and emotions. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, an irreversible act. The truth was out. The carefully constructed world Margaret had spent decades building was now crumbling, and Emily had been the one to tear it down. Her breathing was shallow, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the letter, the evidence that had finally exposed everything. It felt like a heavy burden in her grasp, but also like a key to a door she had long been afraid to open. Margaret's carefully curated facade had fooled everyone, including Emily. The realization that she, too, had been a pawn in Margaret's game made her stomach churn with disgust. Every smile, every kind word, every gesture of affection from Margaret, how many of those had been lies? Emily's eyes wandered down the hallway, her gaze tracing the ornate paintings on the walls, the gleaming marble floors beneath her feet. The mansion, once a symbol of comfort, now felt like a prison. The walls that had once promised security and shelter now seemed to close in around her. Every corner, every creaking floorboard, every shadow lurking in the corners of the house reminded her of the manipulation, the secrets, and the control that had suffocated her for so long. Her heart clenched as the reality set in. She had left behind the only life she had known, but it was a life built on falsehoods. Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness as she walked down the corridor, each step seeming louder than the last. She had spent so many years wrapped in the warmth of Margaret's world, believing in the illusions of family, of protection. But now that the truth had been laid bare, there was nothing left but a hollow shell of a life she had outgrown. The feeling of betrayal surged within her chest, sharp and unforgiving. It felt like a wound, one that throbbed with every memory of Margaret's influence over her, every moment of submission to her power. And now that the power had shifted, Emily didn't know what to expect. But one thing was clear, she had no intention of allowing Margaret to control her any longer. She turned the corner, her breath catching in her throat when she saw her mother standing there, framed by the dim light spilling from the study. Sarah's frail figure looked smaller than Emily remembered, like time had worn away her resilience, leaving only a shadow of the woman who had once been a source of strength. Her mother's eyes, once filled with love and assurance, now held only sorrow, the deep lines on her face marking the passage of time and regret. Emily's heart twisted as her mother's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, she felt an unsettling pull toward her. "Emily." Sarah's voice was quiet, fragile, and yet it cut through the air with a desperation that struck Emily deep in her chest. I heard what happened. I heard everything." Emily felt a flicker of anger ignite inside her. "So, you finally heard it all, did you?" she asked, her voice sharp, the bitterness creeping into her words. "After all these years, after everything you allowed to happen, now you choose to speak up? Now you want to be a part of my life again?" Sarah took a tentative step forward, her eyes pleading. "I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to be caught up in all of this. But, Emily, I didn't know how deep it all went. I didn't know what Margaret had done until it was too late to fix anything." The words felt hollow to Emily. Too late, that was all she had heard from Sarah for years. It was always too late, always too much to handle, always someone else's fault. She had spent so much time burying herself in denial, pretending that everything was fine, that their family was fine, that Margaret's control was for their own good. Emily had spent so many years waiting for her mother to step up, to fight for her, but Sarah had always chosen silence, always chosen Margaret's side. "Too late?" Emily repeated, her voice trembling but growing firmer with each passing second. "It was too late the moment you chose to stay silent. You let her make decisions for both of us, and now you're asking me to forgive you? To trust you again?" Her mother's face crumpled, and she stepped forward, reaching for Emily's hand. But Emily pulled away instinctively, the touch feeling foreign, as if it were something she no longer recognized. "I'm sorry, Emily. I was wrong. I should have fought for you. I should have known better. But, please, don't turn your back on me now. We're all we have left." A sharp laugh escaped Emily's lips, though it lacked any trace of humor. "No, Mom. I'm not the one turning my back. You did that years ago when you let Margaret manipulate everything." She took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions surging inside her. "I can't undo what's been done. But I won't be part of your world anymore. I won't be your pawn, I won't be your puppet. I've spent too many years living in the shadow of Margaret's lies. It's time to step into the light and figure out who I am without you or her holding me back." Emily turned, the words hanging heavy in the air between them, and she felt an unexplainable weight lift from her chest, like the final anchor had been cut free. She didn't look back as she walked toward the door, her footsteps more deliberate now, each one a silent declaration of her independence. She had made her choice. Margaret's empire would fall, and Emily would see to it personally. But even as she stepped into the cool night, with the wind tugging at her hair, Emily could feel the quiet hum of uncertainty within her. The truth she had uncovered was powerful, but it also came at a cost she had yet to fully comprehend. Margaret was powerful, ruthless, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. But Emily was ready for that fight. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer afraid. Whatever happened next, she would stand tall and face it, on her own terms. But the question lingered in her mind: what was the cost of breaking free? And would she ever be able to fully escape the web of lies that had ensnared her from the very beginning? The room had fallen into stunned silence. Eyes once filled with pity now swam with shame. The walls that held decades of secrets seemed to close in around them, heavy with guilt and history. Emily's voice, though steady, trembled with the weight of what she had just revealed. Mr. Harris hadn't died with dignity, he had died surrounded by betrayal. And she, the girl they had all overlooked, had returned not to destroy, but to set the truth free. She stood tall amidst the whispers, the judgment, the shattered illusions. The envelope now lay open on the table, its contents undeniable. She had no regrets. As she turned to leave, the sunlight pierced through the stained glass windows, casting golden light across her face. It was as if, just for a moment, the house itself breathed out a long-held sigh. Emily didn't look back. She walked down the long hallway with quiet dignity, out into a world that was finally hers to shape, not by bloodline or legacy, but by truth. And as the doors closed behind her, so did the chapter of silence.